and we have the ability to share your screen. So you have to be on the screen. Please wave your hand frantically, and we'll ask you to share your screen, even if we have to interrupt the presenter. Apologies in advance to potential presenters right around that 6:05 start time. Not for the whole race, it's a 1,500, so that's equivalent of about a mile. Take about 5 minutes, but maybe for the last couple minutes. But you all got that? Just shout out if you want us to see the results and you know what it is. Councilmember Yakovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the topic of memorial, Chief Kaiser, I believe his name was, former chief of police, passed away a week or so. He passed away in December, but his funeral was this week. I don't know if you recall or remember him. He was a very gentle soul. First person I met in Billings, and it wasn't at the jail. It was,
Yeah, we were wondering, how did that happen?
I think his name was Eugene Kaiser.
Councilmember Gene Kaiser.
All right, thank you for alerting us to that, and again, best to his family. Chris Kukulski, our city administrator, is out, coming back from, I believe, a wedding in Portland. So we've got the A-team with Kevin Iflin, our assistant here. And also just a reminder, there's an email to the council from Denise Bowman, our city clerk, reminding us that we'll be back at City Hall on July 6th for our meeting on the 6th. Because of technical difficulties, it won't be possible for us to use the Zoom hybrid arrangement because it just doesn't coordinate with the equipment that Community 7 TV has available there. They're working on getting that equipment, but because of back orders as a result of COVID, it may be a number of weeks, maybe as much as 2 months, before we can arrange for a hybrid meeting format in City Hall. So stay tuned, but the public is invited and encouraged to come to City Hall starting July 6th if they'd like to be heard on any item of public concern. And also, please always feel free to send us emails, which we do read faithfully. So with that, Assistant City Administrator Iflin, anything else in the way of preliminary matters before we get to our first item, stormwater utility and service levels?
No, Mayor, I think we're ready to jump right in with the presentations.
Okay, I don't know if you've got any introduction for that, or we turn it over to Debbie.
Billings taking the lead on this one.
Okay, Public Works Director Debbie Melling, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak with you tonight. As most of you may remember, we awarded a contract about a year ago to FCS to start looking at a stormwater utility. So we're through the first part, we're ready to go to the second part, and we just want to give you a quick update tonight. So I'll share the screen here. Okay. There we go. So again, a little bit of history. It's been about a year that we've been working on this, and a little bit about our system before we go into what we found out through this first phase. First, we don't have a formal utility for stormwater. We have one for water, we have one for sewer, but we don't for sanitary sewer, but we don't have a formal utility for storm sewer. Because of that, there's some benefits that we see with a utility that we don't currently have in our system. Some of that is formalized rules and regulations. As we always refer to our water and sewer rules and regs, we don't have the same thing for our storm drain system. We think we don't have a very equitable rate structure. We want to improve on that. System development, at this time we don't take system development fees. Development doesn't pay to connect to our system other than I think a $90 connection fee, which is not the same as how we do our water and sewer rules and water and sewer development. And then I just put on there proactive management. When we have a utility, we're able, instead of just kind of randomly being able to address and storm things, it's a more proactive approach to how we manage our system. And then having those dedicated resources, it's a little bit easier when you have a formalized utility to dedicate resources and know what you're doing and making sure you are being proactive and not reactive to everything in our system. So we currently use land use planning zoning for our fee structure, and it's on taxes. So twice a year, people see a stormwater fee on their taxes, and it's assessed by zoning, which really isn't as we'll talk about, a very equitable way, we think, to create that fee. And then, like I said, a year ago, we looked at the Phase 1 contract, and we hired FCS and Dowell to do that. Phase 1, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, is evaluating the program needs and some of the performance of what our system currently is. Then we'll move into Phase 2, which I'll get into after this. I do want to say that we have our project team on the presentation, and I'll introduce them right after so that you can see all of them and ask questions as things come up. So the goal of this project is to define a service level. We are somewhat, I guess, not intentional about what level of service we want to provide for storm. We know that we're reactive. We know when inlets are full, we go clean them, we jet our lines, we look at replacements, but we don't have a defined level of service that says we want to be this good. We want to make sure we're replacing lines at this phase. We're making sure that we're providing, say, a 2-year storm or a 5-year storm. We don't have defined service levels right now, and we want to do that. And that's where input from all of you is going to come at the end. I don't have dollars assigned yet, so it'll be very preliminary discussions. The second thing that we had for a goal is an appropriate structure. Like I said, we want to be more equitable. If you have a house, you should pay the same as someone else with a house. You have the same impervious area. We want to get to a point where what you pay clearly reflects what your impact is in the system. And so that appropriate structure is the second thing we want to do through this, and that transparency, being able to say, you pay this because of this. This is the calculation, this is what happens. And then the last thing I put on here is our outcome for this evening. As we move into Phase 2, we want to have a public participation. We don't always do that on some of the public works plans that we do, but this particular one, because we're moving into a different structure, we want to make sure that we get a lot of public participation. So we wanted to work with all of you to say, what do we want that to look like when we come back in a year? Are you going to say, did you have this person on here? Did you have this person? Who do you want us? What groups do you want us to be working with, if there's any in particular? And then just initial feedback on anything that we can show you tonight. So the Phase 1 results, our system is pretty big. We've got 300 miles of storm drain. We have 500 miles of water and 500 miles of sanitary sewer, so it looks smaller, but volumetrically we're 3 to 5 times bigger than our other systems. We're talking a lot larger diameter pipe is really what we're saying. So it's not as long, but bigger diameter, which in a lot of cases makes it a little bit harder to clean and maintain, obviously more expensive to replace. We've got 9,300 inlets, quite a few miles of drains and ponds. All of this falls under our existing street traffic division right now as something they do when they're not, well, I mean, it's a big part of what we're doing, but it's also combined with our street work, signals, painting, all the other projects that we do, or other programs that we do. So one thing that I put on here is that 65% of our system has little or no information. And we knew that going in. We knew that our stormwater system hasn't been as well documented, as well recorded as what we've had for other systems throughout the years. But the 65% I think was concerning to us. Certainly something that we want to make sure that we figure out. That being said, everything that we have in Phase 1, recognize that we only have 35% of the actual information on our system. So we made a lot of assumptions, and that's what kind of moves us into Phase 2. So our Phase 1 findings, again, just moving on, these are some examples of things we found in our system. Again, things we kind of knew, but it's nice to have it thoroughly vetted and know for a certain instead of just assuming these things. But we have some, well, you can look at the pictures up there, but there's every different type of issue that you can find in a storm system. So the program itself, we split into 6 different categories, and these are the different categories that throughout the course of this, we'll be able to say, okay, deferred maintenance, we want to have a bronze level of service, and I'll explain what that means. But each of these 6 different categories, the council will be able to choose which level of service you want for each of these different program aspects of the program. So deferred maintenance, operations and maintenance, that's the ongoing capital, as most of you know, the pipes, the facilities, the regional facilities, that sort of thing. Water quality compliance, that could be a big thing in our future. Flood protection and risk assessment is one we're really going to have to spend some time on after phase 2 when we start looking into how much we want to be involved in flood protection. The city right now is not really. I mean, the large floods, not really something that we account for. So we'll have to talk about how involved in that we want to be. And then program management and administration. So the ways that we looked at this on our levels of service, we would break it up into status quo and then bronze, silver, and gold. We're not all that clever. We're just kind of going to go what's out there. So we've split it up. We've shown some numbers to date that could get us into those areas, but we are going to have to refine that in phase 2. Like I said, a lot of assumptions in phase 1. So I put a couple of these out here just to show you what this will look like. Deferred maintenance, for instance, we go through and every aspect of our system is quantified and we figure out what the current condition of that asset is. So our storm drain has almost 300 miles. We went through and we did some spot checking of certain areas around town, and then we extrapolated that to the whole system and said, okay, this is what our system probably looks like. We did the same thing with inlets, manholes, everything down the line there. So we look at our deferred maintenance and we're looking at $73 million, 73 or 78, I can't see that far. It's probably right here, 73. So the difference between the levels, just as an example, status quo is we knock it off, as we can, which is regular maintenance, but not aggressive. You go to a bronze level, which says, okay, we want to make sure in the next, I'll have to look, I think it was in the next 40 years, we address all the issues. Silver is in the next 30 years, we address all of the issues. Gold is in the next 20 years, we want to address all the issues. So that's kind of how we split out what those levels of service were to figure out how fast we need to do this work. And this is another example of one of the 6 categories, capital improvements. We have done many master plans and figured out where we think our issues are in the system, where our growth opportunities need to be, and we're sitting about $65 million there. Again, we said updated in phase 2, but what we did was we took all our other studies, put them together, and said this is what's in here, $65 million. So this is what you'll see after phase 2. Tonight it just kind of shows you what we're working toward, that status quo, bronze, silver, and gold in all 6 categories. And you can see where the deferred maintenance, if we want to fix everything in, it's 2015 and 10. If we want to catch up on that deferred maintenance in 20 years, we can pick bronze for that category. Then if we want to do capital improvement but not finish that for 30 years, we can pick silver and capital. So this is going to be an opportunity to it'll be kind of a menu to say, what do we think is important? And we'll have dollar amounts assigned to each one of these. So phase 2, next Monday, there's a contract on the agenda for phase 2, which is basically taking the framework that we have right now and moving it into better numbers, not having to make as many assumptions, but actually having a little bit more investigation done. We're going to validate and gather additional data, refine the costs. Like I said, we do have some costs, the $73 million, the $65 million, but it's as rough as the information that we were able to gather to this point. Public participation, we want to make sure that moving into this creation and the definition of how we want to serve the city, we need to have feedback and people participate in that program. So that'll be part of phase 2. As you know, we have asset management and GIS going on right now, and so this will dovetail really nicely in with that. So all of these 3 projects right now are working together to tell us what we have in our system, and so this isn't outside of those 2 programs, it's working with them. And then scope 3, if we decide to go to a utility and if we decide to change our rate structure, then we'll go into a phase 3, which is implementation. So phase 3, 2 decisions. We kind of referred to this already, but at the end of phase 2, we'll ask you to say what service level do we want, and then what rate structure do we want? What kind of methodology do we use? Do we use impervious area? Do we use, there's a myriad of other ways that we could do that, but we'll bring all those back and ask those questions, and then the creation of that formal utility that allows us to be a little more focused on stormwater. So that was very quick, but we have a lot more detail, but we didn't go into it tonight. And if I could have Tyler introduce the people that are online, we have our consultants online, that way you know kind of who questions may come from. Tyler Westrop was a project engineer on this project.
Tyler,
Hi.
it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tyler Westrope, City Engineering. I'm joined here tonight by the project team of John Ghilarducci at FCS Group, Toggy Ocker at FCS Group, Wade Iron with Dowell, and the city engineer Matt Fogelsong. And together, collectively, we can answer any questions you guys may have with Debbie's input. So thank you for the opportunity to listen to this presentation. We are very excited to start this process, the stormwater utility. We feel it's a very important topic to discuss for Public Works. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thanks, Tyler. Debbie, would you recommend that we just start hitting you with the questions?
That would be great.
Okay, and you can pass them on to whomever you think appropriate. I saw a hand or two. Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, let's pretend we pick the bronze phase, and after a year or two, we say, boy, we're really doing good. Can we switch between these programs without making a big deal about it? And just, or how would we do that, I guess?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. So every year, Jennifer, she's here too. You guys, I don't know if you can see her behind the podium, but Jennifer goes through a rate study every couple of years for all of our different fees that we charge. This would be like the water and sewer rate study that we do every year. We would do the rate every other year. We'd do a rate study and we'd come back at the time and say, sticking with the levels we're at, the rate we're at, this is what those rates would have to go up this year or go down if we're making great headway or whatever. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. Debbie, I may have just heard you incorrectly or just didn't get it right when I was listening, but in the slide that you had that shows phase 1 results, there was something that said 300 miles of storm drains, but I thought you said two different things, 500 miles of pipes and 500 miles of one other thing. What was the one other thing?
So water and sanitary sewer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Could you talk a little bit about the current rate structure that we have, the $90 that you pay twice a year? Could you talk a little bit more about that? Thank you.
Nope. Jennifer can though.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Joy. Right now it is assessed on taxes and we assess according to zone and square footage. We also have a vacant rate. I think we've talked about the vacant rate before, but we right now are assessing $48.64 is what the proposed fee for FY22 will be. That would be for an annual residential home. So the zones don't necessarily kind of coordinate with what we really would have for impervious area. You know, if we were assessing in a different methodology, a lot of times what different communities use instead of if they use an impervious area type of methodology, you know, every residential has kind of an each. So everybody pays the same for residential, and then it's the commercial properties that are assessed for the impervious area.
Jennifer, while you're there, and since you mentioned other cities, can you give us a broad overview of what other communities are doing in this area, especially Montana cities, and is there sort of an accepted set of best practices that are well understood, or are we kind of writing on a blank slate?
Mayor, you know, we always survey other communities when we look at our rates just to see how we compare. And in just comparing rates alone, we're always at the bottom. So other communities in Montana, we're lower than everyone. We go to a few cities outside. I think we checked Washington, South Dakota. Still, we were at the bottom for storm rates. What we don't have yet is what these other communities are actually doing for their storm systems. I mean, are they at the bronze? Are they at the silver? We don't know that yet. So we have to do a little bit more research and come back with how we actually compare.
Okay. Do you think any of our other guests would want to comment on that topic, if that's something they've studied in the past?
Yeah, we think John can jump
John
in
just
there.
raised his hand. Is that be okay if we turn it over to him for a quick overview there? John?
Thank you. I'd be happy to at least share what I do know. I know that Bozeman has a very similar rate structure to the one we are talking about moving toward, which is an impervious-based structure. Missoula just recently implemented a stormwater utility rate. Theirs is a combination of a couple of different approaches. So that one's a little bit unique. But the rate structure that the city of Billings is currently using is one that we don't see very often based on zoning, and it's applied by gross acreage for non-residential. Where we do see many more mature utilities, as you can imagine, is where it rains the most in the Pacific Northwest, Western Washington, Oregon, and those utility rate structures are almost all impervious-based structures where they're trying to link runoff generation to the amount of developed property. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Okay, you bet. Thank you. Other questions for any of our presenters? Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry, I missed what Jennifer said when answering Councilmember Joy's question about I think she said it's like $90 a year now. What would it be under this new program?
Councilmember Neese, we have not got that far where we would actually calculate what the rates would be. First, it would be dependent on what level of service council adopts. And we would have the rates to go along with those at that time, but we're not through that portion. We will start on that in phase 2.
So quick follow-up here.
Go ahead.
So assuming that the status quo, because that's the amount I guess we're currently spending, would we assume it's $90 divided by 12, and that's what the monthly payment's going to be, or will it be additional? I see Debbie shaking her head.
Councilmember Neese, right now it's more like $46 per year is what the annual fee is.
That's the annual fee.
That's the annual fee. If we were going to do status quo, you could do status quo in 2 ways. You could do status quo of service levels. We're not going to put any other effort into the storm system. Just continue doing what we do. And then at that point, you could either change how you assess it. You could still change and assess it by impervious area and possibly assess on the utility bill rather than on taxes. And then you are most likely going to end up with similar rates to what we have now.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Purington and Shaw?
One of my first questions is, what does impervious zones mean, or impervious base? That wasn't my original question, but I think I need to have a little bit of tutoring here.
Sure. Every property has impervious lot coverage. And so impervious is your driveways, your houses, anything that the rain doesn't fall on and basically seep in. So it causes runoff. The pervious areas are your grasses, gravel, any of that sort of thing. So we would be looking at the impervious areas because that's how much runoff you would contribute to the storm system. That's basically what that tie is.
Gee, how do you measure that?
Well, we can go back to John, but we actually hired a company that does our annual or our biannual flyover. We do the aerial photography every couple of years. They can actually go in and digitize each house and figure out how much is impervious and how much is pervious. Now, that being said, we are not, because of administrative issue, we don't want to go to that level. Every single family house is probably going to be an equivalent unit. So it'll just be one. If you have a house, it's one. Where you get into the impervious area where we measure that will be the commercial and industrial, the larger contributors.
So, follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
So, my original question was, how do you know, because you said there was so much information that you don't know right now. Do you know some of the subdivisions that have been annexed in over the years that don't have any sort of stormwater drainage system?
We do. And there are large parts of our city that don't have any formal storm drainage. They rely on runoff just beside the road and down the road. So yeah, we do have quite a few areas we're working on. That's part of that program that we do every year This year we just did Highwood, Harrow. Those were the two that we were looking at. Poet Streets where we do the curbing, we add storm drainage. So those are a lot of those areas we're focusing on now.
So if they don't have anything, they just have runoff, would they be charged at the same level as those that have a drain system?
So when you think about storm drainage, it's very similar to how you think about our arterial fee or our street maintenance fees or whatever. You're paying for the entire city. So if you're a resident in the city, you're going to drive on every other road in town. And part of having a road is having storm drainage. So that's why we connect those to everybody in town.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. So did I understand correctly that there's a $90 fee for development and that's it? That's what we're charging developers to hook into the system? That seems incredibly low. Okay. but
It's
like
incredibly
around
low.
there-
It's just to have an inspector go check the tie-in. We do not charge for system capacity or any kind of system development fee like we do for the rest of our
Will that be a
systems.
piece that comes back to us in phase 2? Okay, because that seems like a really critical area. Thank
We
you.
agree.
Debbie, can you address the issue of whether there's tiers, expectation of different tiers depending on whether your individual property is already serviced by stormwater infrastructure? We have that with streets, gravel streets, for example. The arterial fee is assessed for the arterials, the broader system infrastructure, but isn't intended to subsidize local service. And the expectation is that with newer development, they've been built to a higher standard and they've already paid. And that's probably, but correct me if I'm wrong, what we have with a lot of stormwater. Newer construction has a higher level of infrastructure. Is it the expectation that if we adopt a pervious, impervious system, everybody pays the same regardless of whether they've already paid, in a sense, by paying more for their lot because it was built to a higher standard?
So I am going to let John take the end of this, but if you think about older lots, we also have a lot bigger lots and a lot less lot coverage. So some of those lots that may not have storm drainage on their street probably have a lot more on their actual property. So we've changed to have so much more impervious per our lots, smaller lots, bigger houses, and so the contribution's more. So you could probably argue pretty much every corner of this, but I'm going to let John, if possible, just talk about if he's seen that kind of system credits, if you will, or different tiers.
That's a great policy question. Usually, the rates, 1 square foot of impervious surface area is treated the same, regardless of what a customer might have already done to meet development requirements or on their site. And the biggest reason for that is we're always trying to balance the fairness of what they're paying against the administrative burden of getting that information and then tracking it. And that's sort of the balancing act. And that's something the council could choose to do is try to develop a more equitable rate structure in which those things are taken into account. But it is administratively can be a lot more burdensome and costly to administer that type of rate approach. There's also the policy question of should someone get a rate credit if they're just meeting your development requirements and that rather than exceeding them. So a lot of places might give a rate credit if a developing property does something over and above what the city requires that might be of benefit to other properties. That might be a case where a rate credit is more often given than if they're just meeting development requirements. But that's a choice that the council can make.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Cheriki and Brown?
So I have actually 3 different questions. First one is, how are the irrigation ditches being considered in our runoff situation?
So that is a great question, Councilmember Cheriki. Right now, we actually use a lot of ditches and drains throughout the community for parts of our storm drain system. Not all of them, but some of them. We've acquired rights in some of them. Shiloh Drain, for instance, we own now. Arnold Drain, we own. We've gone through and we've kind of said, we need these facilities. You don't have to have pipes everywhere in your system. You can have ditches and drains. So we are acquiring those if they meet our needs. And so we have that all master planned. We've looked at all of them, figure out what we need and what we don't need. Sometimes the maintenance is a lot higher than the benefit. So we're careful to stay out of some of those.
Okay, different topic, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
So one of the things that we're seeing is the climate is changing, is more intensive storms. What is the current system rated at handling in terms of like 1 inch per hour or anything like that? What are you thinking about in terms, are you thinking about how to upgrade that?
So that is one of the things that is in one of the project components where we talk about capital planning. Do we want to get to a point where we can meet a 10-year storm everywhere throughout the city? I can tell you downtown, we can meet a 2-year storm. Parts of other parts of town, we can see maybe a 5-year storm and do okay. We don't have many places that can handle a 10-year. I can let Tyler speak just a little bit. We have rules and regulations that define how designs have to be done to 2, 5, 10, 50-year events. And so those are part of when we figure out what things are going to cost in all those calculations, we take into account what those design standards are. And I don't know, Tyler, if you have a better sense of what our system can handle.
Yes, thank you. So it is a great question on what our system can handle. The first policy that the city identified for determining how large pipes can be or should be was in 1983. Prior to 1983, there was not necessarily a defined standard for sizing of pipes and sizing of inlets, number of inlets. And so you end up with large portions of the city storm drain system that may meet a 2-year storm or they may not. We don't have a model of the storm system like we do water and sewer. And so what we do look at is kind of an empirical basis, a lot of property owner photographs, videos to help us determine how a street functions. Other portions of our system, the city annexed from county properties. And the county, up until very recently, didn't have as stringent of requirements. Since 1983, our policy for most residential has been a 2-year storm. Subdivisions are 2, 10, and 100-year storms. We make them evaluate each of those storm events. But that is the 24-hour storm, which is the basis for storms in Montana. And you do bring up an excellent question about the intensity of storms. That's something that the city is considering very carefully as we move forward with new policy, and something we can continue to explore in subsequent phases.
Yeah, we had a place in the Western Catskills, and we had 3 100-year storms in an 11-year period. I love the terminology, but it's interesting. One last question, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So I assume this is all part of the cost of services project for Public Works. So how far along are we?
On the entire cost of services?
Yeah, for Public Works too.
So we do cost of services through our rates most years, and then every other year, of course, we look at our permit fees and our subdivision fees and all that sort of thing. So we've got a lot of pieces. I don't know that we have a formalized cost of services that's pulling all of that together. Each one of these is looking at our cost of service for each component. Did you want to add anything to that?
So I'm gathering from that we're still a few years away from really being able to say this new development's going in over here, and this is really what it's going to end up costing us.
So for utilities, we have that. So system development fees are supposed to capture that cost. So the water and sewer, the rate studies that we do and the system development fee that we do is based on our cost of services. And if I'm misspeaking or you want to jump in, so we do feel like we have that for water sewer. For storm, you're exactly right. We are not there with storm. We haven't been there. We don't have a formal program, and it's we're not there. On roads, signals, that sort of thing, we do more of an impact study based on traffic studies. So I would say we do look at it from that standpoint. It's not as formal of a study as what you're referring to, though.
Okay, thanks. To be continued.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, was there a basis for the 40, 30, 2020? Or is that just kind of let's pick some numbers to get started?
It was, Councilmember Brown. So what we're trying to give is some kind of idea that instead of just saying the rates could go up this much if you want a silver, we wanted to put a number to it that says if you want us to get the deferred maintenance done in the next 15 years, that's a silver. We just put numbers to it that were reasonable, but also responsible in our minds. So that's how we came up with those. There's nothing magic about those numbers.
Okay. Have a follow-up, Mayor?
Please.
So I saw in your presentation, I think it was 1.2 million we're collecting now, right? Something like that for maintenance fees.
Jennifer's got the money.
Councilmember Brown, the total amount that we collect is about 4.5 million.
For just the maintenance.
That's for all of Storm. And you can break that into about a third. So a third pays for debt service, a third for O&M, and then a third for capital.
Okay. And so this 65 to 73 million or whatever it was, that's in addition to what we're collecting now. Because now it's just status quo plus an additional possibly 70 million.
Correct.
Over 40 years or 30 years, whatever.
Right. I mean, as part of our system, we are doing some of the capital projects. So, you know, not to the level of 65 million, but we're knocking 1.5 to a million out a year.
Okay. So just pie in the sky, if we were to say, let's go bronze, then we could kind of estimate that we're going to double that $40-some a year to get to the 90 to try to hit that 40-year span.
Yeah, we'll obviously fine tune those numbers, but
Right.
double is about probably a good guess right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dees?
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, this is for you. A few years ago, they started designing some, I think they call them skirt curbing. We've done some of those up in the heights, areas that don't have stormwater drains, things like that. And every time I've seen curbs go in down the street, they have always that problem because the water that used to go into permeate into the lawns and stuff like that doesn't do that anymore. And then it goes down the street, floods somewhere else, and in fact, I've seen it wash away banks of the ditch, things like that. So, is there anything within the study or within the stormwater utility field here that says, no, we're not going to put storm drains in, we're going to design these so the water doesn't go into the system, and that we're going to keep it retained in the local area, the soil, and not have to worry about it?
Sure. Councilmember Neese, thanks for that question. We have a storm drain manual right now, a manual that defines basically how designs have to be done, what storm options for how you deal with it, quality issues, all that sort of thing. So in there, we give the option of discharging to a pipe system, retaining all on site, different discharge points without not being in the city system. We give quite a few options, and then we leave it pretty open for the consultants to design something innovative. And the reason we do that is there is innovation happening in stormwater all the time. There's new systems coming in for primarily water quality, but also dealing with roadside swales and that sort of thing, which we didn't used to do. So we do allow those per our manual. That being said, the engineers and the geotechs that work on those projects have to make sure it perks in. I mean, if we get something that says it's going to perk in and we can see that it's a soil that is not going to perk, we'll reject those studies. And we'll say, no, you're going to have to find a different way to do them. So it is twofold. We don't just put those in and say, go use them. They have to be appropriately designed.
Go ahead.
So along the design, so if we go forward with something like this and we look at an area that doesn't have storm drains, they got curbs and sidewalks and things like that, would you say, well, listen, we're going to design this so we don't need storm drains, but it's going to permeate into the soil because the soil is. So will you look at that alternative as well, so you're not throwing more water into the storm system that has to be treated before it goes into the river? And then also, what other technologies, I've read some other technologies where they're actually making streets that are permeable as well. And so how will this all take into impact so we can really prevent having to ship the water out to the river, let it stay local, even through the streets, off the curbs, over the strip curbs into the yards.
Right. So we're getting into a lot of the policies that we've been looking at for a lot of years. DEQ is coming in with water quality requirements now, which we never used to have. So all of our pipes were sized for the immediate runoff. Whatever comes in goes out to the river. Now every subdivision, every site has to retain on site a certain amount of water. So I think subdivisions are 50. Tyler's probably cringing when I say these numbers, but I think commercial sites are 50 years. Actually, subdivisions are, go ahead, Tyler. It's killing you that I'm saying these numbers.
Yeah, so commercial sites, we require them to detain for the 50-year storm, size their facilities for the 50-year storm. Subdivisions, we make them size their facilities for to mimic pre-developed conditions of the 2, the 10, and the 100-year storm. Per DEQ requirements, new development has to treat the first ½ inch of rainfall. And for Billings, that's actually a fair number of our rainstorms. The tricky part is, depending on where a developer is building, the infiltration rates are virtually zero. And so they are still treating that, but it's through new technologies that have come on board, mechanical treatments. Other subdivisions, they do infiltrate that first ½ inch to reduce pipe size, to reduce the amount of water that ultimately goes to the river.
If no one else has a question, we have one other question.
Go ahead, then I've got one.
Debbie, I'm not real excited about creating a whole new utility department. In fact, when we went to do the study, my interest was more in getting a good, proper system development fee, so that the city can charge appropriately when new subdivisions and businesses come online. Do we have to create the utility to get that amount of that system development fee amount that we need to charge if we're coming online?
No. The answer is there's a lot of options here, and they're not dependent on each other. So we can look at the methodology of our rates. We can look at whether it's a rate or a fee. We can look at the level of service. The reason that we're calling it is a utility, and it's really we can do the same things outside of a utility, but for us, the ability to administer a utility, it's not a whole new department. It's basically using resources, allocating a little bit differently. It wouldn't be like hiring a whole new utility group. It would be saying, okay, this component is a utility. And in phase 2, we'll bring that back and say what that entails. But really all these things are going to fall under the umbrella. New SDFs, new methodology, new rates. They're all independent of each other.
Thank you, Debbie. I would encourage you to come up with a little different terminology than utility. Just for myself, I don't know what a utility is, except for on Monopoly board, it's the black things in the middle of the board, I think, and I think of it as a company. But I think our usage here is different, a fee structure or something like that. But that's a bit of a hurdle. But larger question, kind of the 30,000-foot level here is, we know what the cost of imposing these additional fees might be very broadly. That $70 million was thrown out. But what's the cost of doing nothing? Why not just do nothing? We're never going to design a system where water always stays on people's property in a 100-year flood. You already said downtown is a 2-year standard, which seems incredibly low, and nobody has a 10-year standard. So what? What's the harm? Can you just help us with that? There must be damage, maybe. There is a cost of a lack of density. If you're requiring people to retain on site, that means more land, so there's a cost there, I guess. Environmentally, you're putting water from impervious structures with lots of contaminants into the river. What's the problem? What's the cost that justifies $70 million?
So again, this doesn't have to cost anything. Status quo is an option. So at the end of the day, we can choose to assess differently. We can choose to spend our money differently. We can choose to call it, something different as far as utility. And I do that because we have a water utility, a sewer utility, and a storm utility. That's why I go with water or utility. All of those things are basically independent of each other. If we stay with status quo, As far as not having a formalized storm utility or whatever we're going to call it, we have a harder time tracking. We have a harder time making sure that we're proactive in how we approach that. We have storm drain fees that are just here, and basically it's reactively used. We have some capital planning. This allows us to kind of formalize our approach to it. So do nothing. We have a system that has $1 million a year of capital. We have 300 miles of pipe that's not being rehabbed every day. So while we can stay there, my recommendation when I bring this back is not going to be to stay there. We have 0 rehab projects right now in storm drain. So within 50 years, we're not going to have a storm drain that hasn't collapsed. And yeah, I don't know, 50, well 70, I don't know, somewhere in there. If you don't rehab your pipes, you're not going to have pipes. So we can't keep going as we are. But we have not, as a city, done a very good job of focusing our efforts on storm. It's just kind of been the forgotten thing that only is remembered 10 times a year when we have rain. And so this is our attempt at formalizing and doing a better job of documenting and being more, a little more intentional about how we spend the money that we do have, whether that be what it is now or more. Did that?
Sure, absolutely, and I'm thinking this report will help spell out some of those
Yes,
costs and benefits.
absolutely.
Councilmember Ewald, you had your hand up, I think, and then Councilmember Running.
Thank you, Mayor. So Debbie, are you guys utilizing temporary retention ponds to reduce the maximum emergency flow of the water to where like the one lot in a subdivision becomes a detention pond or retention pond that drains off over a week rather than right now when the storm hits? And if you're doing that, does that reduce the cost of those subdivisions that actually have that type of a setup? Because it's slowing down and it's making it so you don't need the big massive systems.
So the requirements now by DEQ are that every subdivision retains their it's called LID, low impact development. That first half inch has to be retained on site, detained on site. It can be metered and released eventually. But that's exactly right. Our storm drain system, quantity-wise, is as bad as it's ever going to get. The more we develop, the better it's going to get, because everyone is required to retain on site or detain on site. So yes, we're using all of that, all of those methodologies.
Follow up, please.
Go ahead.
So then what we're kind of talking about is just funding this pipe or the conduit we have in the ground now so that it has its way to get to the river. We're doing all this good stuff in the new subdivision.
So the storm drain system is we have the existing. I don't know if you remember, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we put an 8-foot diameter pipe downtown. That was about a $9 million project. So we have projects like that that are serving underserved areas now. The capacity was less than a 1-year storm downtown up until that. So we have projects like that that are taking care of areas that currently flood. We have projects like 62nd and Rimrock. We put that regional pond out there so that all that development can go into the regional pond, saving us a lot of money on oversizing pipe. We have projects where we're rehabbing pipes that have collapsed, culverts that have collapsed. So it's across the board. There's projects that are dealing with all aspects of storm drainage.
Oh, okay, thank you, Councilmember Running.
Thank you. Debbie, I think you've been kind of answering this question related to just what Councilmember Ewald and Mayor Cole. I can think of different areas around the city that have been just repeatedly problematic when there's been heavy rain or when we've had heavy snow and then that snow melts, especially some of the areas I'm thinking about are in Ward 4 that kind of sit at the end, like in the college streets. They sit at the end of that hill or Cottonwood subdivision, and that just becomes a flood into those people's homes. And then there's been some areas, I think, in Ward 1 that just seem to be problematic over and over and over again. Am I understanding you correctly that this type of structure and organization would really help to see what's really wrong with those areas versus just going in and trying to put a Band-Aid on it, but it just keeps flooding people's homes?
Right. So this particular process that we're doing right now is looking more at the financial side and the cost of services side. The master plan that I referred to in the presentation where I said we had about 65 million in work, those are identified problems that we know we have out there. And that $1.5 million that we get every year for capital goes toward those fixes. Obviously, that's 60 years of, numbers aren't quite right, but 50 some years of fixing to get all of those done. And we prioritize every year which ones need to be done first. So it is captured in here as far as a cost. And then when we talk about level of service, that's when we'll decide, do we want to get all those done in 40 years? Do we want to get them done in 30 years? When do we want to get all those done?
Okay, so if I
So we use it.
follow up with that. So if I'm understanding correctly, if we put a different type of rate structure financially in place, there's the possibility then that city council could say, okay, the 20 years, the 30 years, that helps get to those problem areas a little bit faster than what it seems like you're getting to them now?
Right. So even if we don't create a different structure, we can increase rates to get to those faster. So that level of service, when you all give me the feedback that says we don't want to wait 60 years, we want this in 40 years, that'll be reflected, whether it be in a rate, a fee, however that is assessed. We'll take that into account and try to figure out how to make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sounds like we are coming close to wrapping up here. Any final questions? Councilmember Diaz.
Debbie, you said something I didn't quite understand when I think when Councilmember Brown asked about the fees, whether you do an assessment every year or you do utility where it's a monthly. You mentioned something about it's harder to keep track of the projects and get those projects done. I'm not sure if I understand the difference, whether we do a monthly amount or we do twice a year the money comes in. Won't you still be able to track all those projects the same and still use the funds to get it done? Or what's the advantage of having that monthly come in versus just twice a year?
So if I said that wasn't what I meant. The storm utility itself allows us to do a better job of keeping our resources focused on the priorities for that utility. So it helps us spend our resources better. It doesn't help us necessarily track them better. We can track our resources now. What my point is that if you have one entity instead of it mixed in different locations and not a program itself, if we have more of a programmatical approach, it's just easier to make sure we're meeting the goals of the program. I don't know if that helps at all. You don't look like that helps at all. We can track our money now. We can track it whether we get it twice a year, 12 times a year. That doesn't matter. Yeah. So I guess the answer is that's irrelevant.
Excuse me, Mayor, a quick follow-up.
Sure.
But does it make you, it seems to me then it makes a difference on how the projects are tracked then. Is that what you're saying, that you somehow can have a better way to track the projects under a utility type plan versus not? Does that mean this utility plan also includes hiring more staff to manage that?
So we're probably, and my fault here, we're probably focusing a little too much on the utility word that's bothering you too. Really what we're trying to do, all of the things that we're trying to accomplish could be done in the current structure we have. But we don't have a structure that is as formalized as we have for water, sewer, where you have those rules and regs, where you have resources that are focused on just that aspect of the program. So what we're trying to do is make a more just an intentional approach to making sure that stormwater is meeting certain levels of service. And so we can do all this without a utility. We're calling this a utility because it encompasses so many different things. But no, if we decide that we need to meet a higher level of service, it could be resources. But those are the numbers that we'll come back and we'll say, if you want silver on your deferred maintenance, we need 4 more people to be focusing on inlets and culvert replacements and this kind of thing. So those dollars, those additional resources will come to you in a number that says silver is this much.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, just a quick one, Debbie. So you're calling this a proactive kind of a plan here. Proactive is ongoing and ongoing and ongoing and ongoing. So we're talking 40 years. We're going to kind of catch all this stuff up. And is the plan then that we stay at a bronze level forever until that's changed by somebody to gold or whatever. And does that rate then fluctuate on that need after, say, the 40 years? But we continue with a bronze proactive plan to keep everything up so we don't end up where we're at now, right?
Right, right. It just gives us, I think it gives us a goal to shoot for, that we know that you are telling us this is what we want you to be doing. It just helps us to know we're doing the right thing.
Okay, thank you. Any other final questions for Debbie before we move on to public comment and then item number 2? Any other questions or other presenters on the team here? I'm not seeing anything, so we'll open it up for public comment on item number 1, the stormwater arrangement, utility/fee structure that we've been discussing. If you're present in the library and you'd like to comment, please come to the podium. We'll ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less and tell us your name and address. And then we'll also ask if there's anybody online. If you're online, you'll need to use your unmute feature or your raise the hand feature so that Denise Bowman, our city clerk, knows to take you off mute. Now let's start here in the library. Is there anybody present in the library who would like to comment on item number 1? If so, please come to the podium. Not seeing anybody come to the podium in the library. Denise, do we have anybody who has clicked the raise hand feature to be unmuted? And just a reminder for anybody who might be online, that's at the bottom of your screen. If you hover down there, you'll get a little hand. Click on that and Denise will see it and take you off mute. Denise, do we have anybody who would like to comment online?
No, Mayor, I have no attendees this evening.
Okay, thank you. We'll close the public comment period then on item number 1. And if there's nothing else from council, in the way of questions, comments, we'll move on to number 2. Don't see any frantically raised hands by council, so we'll move to item number 2.
Debbie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Debbie has a question.
One of the things we were looking for was input on public participation. How much effort you would want to see when we come back in a year.
Great, thank you very much. So if people would like to comment, I'll comment that we inevitably, with these planning efforts, somebody comes back and says, you didn't tell me. And it's unavoidable. So what I would recommend is that there be a written public participation plan, a PPP. That maybe you could ask council to approve, which groups you would go to, for example, how many meetings you would have. Would there be any broad notice to the public in utility bills, whatever that is, but there'd be a written plan so that we can look at it, the public can look at it, we can bless that, tweak it, and then that way when you come back in a year, you can say, well, wait a minute, this is what we all agreed on a year ago. That'd be my personal recommendation. But anybody else want to comment? I guess I saw a thumbs up from Councilmember Shaw on that. Anything else that council members like to add to on that topic? Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. I guess I'm just so confident we're going to get a public information officer that would help you. But also, reaching out to all of the city task forces, I think that's always a good way to get the word out, as well as you do a really good job of the work you've been doing with Q2 and some of the other video projects you've been doing. You've been doing such a great job of that, and you have a great presence on social media. Just keep pumping it out there.
Councilmember Brown, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, I'm not sure we're answering your question, so I'm going to rephrase that question in my thought. How much effort do we want you to go forward in phase 2? Is that what you're asking? Or drop it and we're going to do nothing?
Right. I mean, from a public standpoint, and I guess I would say, yes, you'll have a contract in front of you next Monday. If you want us to drop this, vote no on that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. Seeing no other raised hands by council, we'll move on then to item number 2, our coronavirus response initiative update. Tam is here. We're online, I guess. And Kevin, anything before I just turn it over to Tam?
No, Mayor, I think that Tam's booted up and ready to go.
Okay, Tam's in our Community Development Office. Tam Rodir, it's all yours.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council. I am thrilled to be here today to engage
And
with
Tam,
you.
I apologize for interrupting you, but better to interrupt you now than later. Has anybody been online to see what the results of the women's 1500 was?
Keep looking.
She came in 8th.
What's that?
She came in 8th.
She came in 8th. Okay, so congratulations! Great effort by the by Danny Aragon and the family. Back to you, Tam. Sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to engage with you this evening. I am joined today by 2 AmeriCorps Vista volunteers who are serving in the city's Community Development Division on a coronavirus response initiative. They are here today to share with you information about their project, the results from 2 coronavirus surveys that were conducted last fall, the timeline for moving forward to address identified service gaps, and to share updates on their individual efforts to address community needs. So I'm very excited to introduce to you Amber Nichols and Blake Matthews.
Thank you so much, Tam, and thank you everyone else for having us here today, council people, and Mr. Mayor, we thank you very much. I will go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Okay. So again, hello, thank you for having us. My name is Amber Nichols.
And I am Blake Matthews, and we are AmeriCorps Volunteers in Service to America, otherwise known as AmeriCorps Vista members. And as AmeriCorps Vista members, we have made a 1-year commitment to work on a poverty project here in Billings, Montana. And our commitment is with the City of Billings Community Development Division on this Coronavirus Response Initiative project. Through this project, we've been tasked with gathering community feedback regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as mobilizing community resources to better serve the low-income populations here in Billings. And this is the foundation year for this particular VISTA project, and there'll be at least 1 VISTA working towards these goals in the next year. Amber and I would sharing a bit as part of this project.
So I was born in Helena, Montana, and I moved to Billings when I was in high school to pursue pre-professional dance training. And after graduation, I moved out to Seattle to dance both collegiately and professionally. However, I was injured pretty shortly after I got there and entered into an early retirement, the ripe age of 18. I quickly transferred over to Seattle Pacific University's pre-med program, where I graduated this past spring with a degree in applied human biology. And I chose to come back to Billings, not only to be closer to friends and family in Montana, but also to give back to a community that certainly did a lot for me when I lived here. For my service term, I do plan on going back to school and pursuing a Master's of Science in the History and Philosophy of Science, followed by PhD work in science diplomacy.
Hello, so my name is Blake, and I grew up in a little town called Davidson, which is about 20 miles north of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I pretty much have lived my entire life in North Carolina, and I actually attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Public Health. And after graduating in May of 2020, I spent enough of my life in North Carolina, and I basically wanted to move as far away as I possibly could while also doing anything I could to help coronavirus. This is how I ended here in Billings, Montana, 2 miles away, working on the response project. And after my service term, I hope to work in a clinical setting. And I also dream of attending medical school and studying medicine in a practice where I can form a strong connection with those that I get to serve.
Okay, so here you will see a simplified timeline of the CDBG-CV allocation process. And CDBG-CV just stands for Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus, and we will be throwing that term around quite often in this presentation, so bear with us. Blake and I have been involved in the first 3 steps of this process, so we will be focusing on community assessment, report publication, and establishing priorities today. Any questions regarding the CDBG-CV applications themselves or funds dispersal can be directed towards Brenda Beckett or Tamara Deer in the Community Development Division office. And we will start first with community had been impacted by COVID-19. We conducted large-scale assessment using 2 surveys, one for community members and one for service providers. And paper copies of the community member survey were distributed via city water bills in September and October to over 33,000 residencies across Billings. And while this did reach a huge proportion of the Billings population, it did miss anyone who didn't get the bill in the mail, which includes the majority of our renters as well as our homeless and transient populations. So to increase accessibility of the survey, Blake and I took to the streets and we hand-delivered surveys at the Southside Gardeners Market. We coordinated with local healthcare groups, social service providers, Homefront, also known as the Housing Authority of Billings, and other rental agencies to distribute flyers and surveys. And we also advertised the survey around town using flyers with little QR codes on there to make taking the survey that much easier from your phone. And by these means, we distributed an extra 2,000 surveys. Total, we had 3,512 respondents complete the survey, which was about a 10% response rate. And for our service providers, we established a mailing list of area providers using the Montana 211 guide from United Way, as well as the resource notepad, which was created by a former Vista. And we mailed each of them via phone or email. And this generated a 37% response rate with 26 providers responding.
And Amber and Blake, I'll just give you guys a heads up. The internet connection's a little bit spotty here, so we're catching 98% of what you say, but on occasion, we might miss a couple words here. We might have to come back with some questions. Just a heads up. You can get rid of that by getting rid of your video probably, but it's nice to be able to see you as well. So we'll leave that up to you, but go ahead.
Thank you. Well, continuing on report publication, also feel free to stop and ask us any sort of questions if we do break up. We won't mind. So Amber and I did manually enter approximately 3,000 paper surveys. And so after all these surveys were accounted for, we began to outline, analyze, and draft our assessment report. And our work was consistently reviewed by community development staff members Tam and Brenda. And our first draft ended up being completed in December of 2020. Our CD board members were also constantly updated throughout this process as they received report updates as well as presentations. And in January of 2021, we published a draft of our report on the City of Billings website and opened it up for a 30-day public comment period. And after this period, on February 9th of 2021, our final version of the report was published. And so I wanted to touch a little bit on the demographics of our community member survey before we started to dive into our results and recommended priorities. HUD guidance does list that all activities funded by the CDBG-CV funds must primarily benefit low-income individuals. And so of all of our community members survey respondents, 42% identified as being low income and living within the city limits of Billings. And taking into account HUD guidance, we focused the entirety of our report as well as this presentation on these low income and local respondents. So any statistics that you do see regarding our community members will be out of this data pool. And so moving forward, we know that at least 53% of these respondents are aged 62 years or older, and the breakdown of the identified race of these respondents is presented here in the bottom right-hand corner. This does closely resemble Billings census data, which lists Billings citizens as being 89% white, 5% American Indian or Alaska Native, and 6% other.
Okay, looking next at establishing priorities, using both survey feedback as well as the spending stipulations set in place by Housing and Urban Development. So according to HUD, all CDBG-CV sponsored activities must first exclusively prevent, prepare for, or respond to coronavirus. Second, avoid the duplication of local, state, and federal services. And third, primarily benefit low-income individuals. So you'll see here at the bottom of your screen the categories of greatest needs as communicated to us by survey respondents. And once we take into account the HUD guidance, particularly the second stipulation of avoiding the duplication of services, these are the needs that can be addressed with CDBG CV funds. And it looks like the animation isn't quite working, but I will just walk you through what's going on here. For service providers, needs that we can address include virtual services, increasing telework capacity for employees, and increasing the ability to facilitate social distancing. And for our community members, needs that can be addressed include computer and internet access, food security, mental health, and utilities assistance. Okay, looking first at virtual needs. Needs for computer and internet access were widely reported among both community members and service providers. Nearly a third of our service providers indicated their greatest need as being increasing their ability to provide teleservice or virtual services to their clients. And the majority of providers indicated that their clients had been impacted by not having a computer, tablet, or internet in their homes. And for our community members, just about 30% indicated having less access to reliable internet than they needed. And also to note here is that the good majority of community members were unaware of the Stay Connected grant and the Telework Assistance grants, which were available through the state of Montana. And we will be chatting a bit more about awareness of services later in this presentation.
So moving next to food security. Food insecurity did appear as a major theme throughout both of our surveys. And you can see here that the vast majority of our service providers did report that their clients had experienced a decrease in food security due to the pandemic. And when a similar question was posed to our community members, we had 1/5 report a lack of food or groceries as an impact due to COVID-19. And so you may be wondering why there's such a large difference in percentages here between our service providers and our community members. And one possible explanation for this is that the clients in which these service providers are reporting on are actively seeking aid and assistance for their situations, whereas our community members may or may not be. And so these clients may be more vulnerable and therefore at a higher risk for some of these adverse effects of the pandemic, such as food insecurity. So moving on, we also did a cross-analysis, of the community members who did report a lack of food or groceries. And we found that 3 out of every 4 of them had at least some knowledge of or were currently using the food bank and food pantry assistance. And like Amber said, we'll touch on the awareness of services later in this presentation.
Okay, moving next to mental health. Questions about mental health were asked directly on the survey, and many respondents also chose to elaborate on this topic in pre-response questions. Nearly 70% of our providers indicated their clients did not have access to mental health services. And for our community members, increased stress since the start of the pandemic has been widespread, with just about 40% indicating they had less access to mental health services than they needed. One question also asked respondents to indicate their degree of support in categories like taking a break, and for this category, nearly 30% had no support.
So both of our service providers and community members had reported difficulties in keeping up with utility payments. You can see here we had about 2/3 of our service providers report that the pandemic had affected the ability of their clients to keep up with utility payments. And when we posed a similar question to our community members, 1/5 responded similarly. And then I would like to draw your attention here to the bottom half of this slide. If you recall, with HUD guidance, all activities that are funded by CDBG CV funds must avoid duplication of the local, state, and federal services. And so there are existing services currently in Billings that are addressing employment and income loss. However, Amber and I thought it would be important to mention the statistics of employment and income loss from our surveys, as income loss can overlap with the ability to pay necessary expenses, such as utilities, as we see here. And income and employment loss was actually the #1 overall reported pandemic impact by service providers speaking on their clients' behalf and by our community members speaking on their own or their household's behalf. And we had 88% of service providers and 34% of community members report this.
So after reading through and analyzing feedback on thousands of surveys, both Blake and I were surprised to see how many respondents had been adversely impacted by the pandemic, yet were unaware of the services available to them in Billings or through the state of Montana. So this graph on the right shows the percentage of respondents who had some knowledge or were using the services listed below. And as you can see, the majority of respondents had at least some awareness of the food bank and food pantry assistance, whereas only between 20 and 40% of respondents had any knowledge of the other 5 services listed. And we also asked respondents to indicate their involvement with public assistance, both before and after April 1st of 2020. And 34% of respondents reported using assistance before this date, 22% reported applying for assistance after this date. However, these numbers necessarily may not be mutually exclusive, meaning someone who is using assistance both before and after April 1st will be reflected in both statistics.
So in conclusion, the priorities that we have discussed during this presentation will be considered in allocating CDBG CV funds to applicants, and they do reflect the input of the Community Development Board. And giving attention to these categories of internet and computer access, utility assistance, food security, and mental health will help our community prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus in very meaningful ways. Ways that not only as you've seen our community members give their importance to, but also our service providers as well.
And again, these priorities have been established using both the survey feedback and the HUD spending guidance that you see at the top of the screen. And while it may not be a priority per se, bringing awareness to the services that address these needs may be essential to our community going forward, given that many of our community members are unaware of the assistance available to them in Billings and through the state of Montana. And I will now just briefly recap where we've been since report publication and where we'll be going next. CDBG CV applications went live on the 19th of April, and they were to be completed by May 14th. And completed applications were soon after presented to the CD board. The CD board made their recommendations on priorities earlier this month. And Blake and I are here with you today to share those priorities with you all before the City Council will move to action in dispersing funds starting next week on the 28th of June. And last but not least, we would love to share with you what we've been doing since report publication to address a few of the needs communicated to us by survey respondents. My first project is called the Pandemic Pals Project, and this is a letter writing campaign that connects K-8 students, seniors, and community volunteers to promote pandemic safe socialization and to decrease loneliness, especially among our elderly residents. And to date, we have over 150 participants. My second project is the COVID-19 Resource Guide, and this guide compiles COVID-specific resources into categories like healthcare, childcare, and food security. And it's been distributed to state agencies, local organizations, and it's also available on the City of Billings website.
My project has been a uplifting video that I call Happy Notes, and this has stemmed from reading through so many surveys with much about negativity and social isolation, as well as just overall sadness. And I also, moving to a completely new place during the height of a pandemic, I experienced a lot of these things personally as well. And so I wanted to make a video to shine a light on the more positive aspects of the pandemic itself. And I've done this through interviewing a lot of my fellow VISTA members, as well as different community members throughout the city of Billings, including Bill Cole here. And so my hope is when people view it, they feel a sense of community solidarity as well as a sense of joy, and can reflect on the pandemic in a more positive outlook. And so I've posted a link of this video below and would be more than happy to share it with anyone who would wish to see it later. Also, Amber and I have been coordinating with local partners to bring COVID-19 vaccination clinics and vaccine-hesitant population. Downtown Billings provided gift cards that will be distributed as incentives to anyone receiving a vaccine at these clinics. Confirmed clinics will take place this week, tomorrow on June 22nd at the Falcon Run Community Center, which is within the Homefront properties in the Heights, as well as on June 24th at the Gardeners Market and on Friday, June 25th at Rimrock Mall. Thank you, Mayor and council members, so much for your time. Amber and I would be happy to answer any questions you have about our report or our findings or the personal projects that we have created. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much, Amber and Blake. Congratulations, great report, great projects. Obviously, a lot of work went into all of that, a lot of great findings. Thank you for your work on your individual projects as well. And in case of Blake, welcome to Billings, a little belatedly. And to Amber, welcome back to Billings. So appreciate having you guys. I guess we'll just open it up to, for council members to pose some questions or comments. Councilmember Boyette and Ronnie.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe Amber, could you answer this? One of your very first slides showed a 10% response. Is that good, bad? How does that equate to the reality of the world? Can you give me some definition or examples? Or
Yes, I think for a community assessment of this scale, 10% is nothing to shrug at, but it definitely, we could have, I think, done a bit more with outreach to get that percentage up a little. I think the average for a community assessment is about 18%, if I remember correctly.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. Awesome job, both of you. Very great, very good presentation. One of my questions has to do with the applications that opened in April and then closed in May. And it's my understanding, that these were applications for funding, different type of projects. And it's my understanding that only two service providers actually applied for these funds. One is, how was this promoted to different service providers throughout the community? And why do you think that only two applied for funding?
I'll jump in there, Councilmember Ronning. Thank you for the question. We sent it out direct email to all the local service providers that Blake and Amber mentioned were part of the survey. We also sent it out to a resource list, and we also posted it on the city website. It went out as far and wide as we could think of to get it out there. Yes, we only got 2 responses. I can only speak for myself. I believe it may have been all of the stipulations on what CDBG CV funds could be used for, and maybe they didn't feel like they would be awarded the grant if it was a duplication of services and support. That's only my take on it. It could be something beyond that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? And Tam, maybe you can just clarify, and I guess we'll get into this next week, but the applications that were submitted do not use up all of the CDBG first tranche of dollars, correct? It's just a portion, so there'll be an additional opportunity for people to apply for the remainder. Is that correct?
That's correct. We roughly got $909,000. If you subtract out the administrative costs, I believe it leaves somewhere in the neighborhood of $760,000 that would be available to grant to local organizations in the form of CDBG CV funds. The 2 applications that we received, one was for $55,000, and don't quote me, but I think the other one was $115,000. So yes, there is a significant amount of money that would still be available. We could go out for another round of applications. We could duplicate something that we're already doing. Staff could use the funds themselves to identify service gaps that were identified in the survey. So we have lots of options, and we would come back to you with those options and make a recommendation.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Trinke.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to ask a little bit more about the survey that was asked earlier. I know 10% wasn't very much, but I did see that 46% of it, I think you said, was the low income, which is the target you wanted anyway. So it seems like you may have achieved your target. But you mentioned you sent it out in the water bill. Was that just the city water bill, or was it the Heights water bill as well? Because that covers a large portion of the Heights area, which much of that area is under the low-income housing up there. Do you know if it was sent to, included the Heights water bill families as well?
I do not think it included the Heights, the water bill in the Heights, but I could be wrong. So Tam, please correct me if that's the case.
Councilmember Neese, I believe that it was not necessarily sent to the County Water District of Billings Heights. We did make a copy of it available to them. Whether or not they posted it or sent it out, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Trinky?
Yeah, I was, the one thing that I was struck by was the lack of awareness for housing assistance. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
You know, we were struck by the lack of awareness in our community as well for a lot of the public assistance projects. And one connection that we can make within the survey is that quite a few of our respondents struggled with internet connection, virtual needs, and a lot of these service providers have shifted their outreach efforts to mainly virtual means, you know, websites, social media, that sort of thing. But again, that's just a speculation that maybe their outreach efforts no longer match up with the populations that they're trying to serve. But again, just a stipulation or a speculation, excuse me, and I'm not exactly sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for any of our presenters? Or other comments? I'm not seeing any, so we'll open it up for public comment, and then if council has anything further, we can address that after our public comment period. So this is an opportunity for anybody in the library who might want to comment on item number 2 or online to do so. Again, if you're here in the library, please just come to the podium. Ask that you tell us your name and address and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And the same if you're online, but if you're online, you'll need to tell Denise to take you off mute. And the way you do that is to just go to the bottom of your screen on Zoom, look for the raised hand feature, click on that, and she will know that you want to be taken off mute. So is there anybody here in the library who would like to comment? If so, please come to the podium. Anybody here online here in the library who would like to comment on item number 2? Not seeing anyone in the library, so is there anyone online? If so, again, just click on that raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen so you can be taken off mute. Denise, do you see anyone who has raised their hand to comment on item number 2?
No, Mayor, I have no attendees at this time.
Okay, we can close our public comment period then on item number 2. Back to council. We'll be seeing this again for the specific requests on the applications in 1 week at our business meeting. But are there other questions or comments by council before we move to wrap up our meeting tonight? Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. I just really wanted to commend again the actual programs that both of these AmeriCorps Vistas developed. That pandemic program, really amazing. One of my dad's best friends lives in an assisted living facility, and he's in his 90s. These people were basically locked in for well over a year. They could not receive visitors. They did not go out except for appointments, things like that. My dad only recently just saw his friend, and then you still have to make an appointment to be able to see these individuals. So that pen pal program was just so the for that sense of communication and helping these people feel like they were still part of the community. So thank you. And then the happy notes, I definitely will be looking at that, and hopefully you can send us this PowerPoint sooner rather than later so we can get those links. And so truly awesome job to both of you. Really thank you. The AmeriCorps Vistas do extraordinary work in our community. So thank you for your dedication and your commitment, your service.
Absolutely. Anything else from council? Don't see anything else.
Roy.
Oh, Roy, thank you. Councilmember Dees.
Thank you, Mayor. Did I hear you say that there were some funds left over? And I guess to the community, the question would be, if that's the case, then is there an extension, another application period? What is the plan to try to get rid of those funds to be utilized for this program?
Good question. Tam, can you tell us a little bit more about the schedule there? And here, I think we're talking about CARES Act dollars. Maybe you also want to comment on ARPA dollars.
The CDBG CB funds, yes, when we award the 2 grant applications, we will still have some funding left. We are still devising how we're going to move forward and in what ways, but we will come back to the council with that. It could be that we will open up another round of applications. It could be that we'll work with other city departments on CARES Act needs in their departments. It could be that we could duplicate one or both of the applications in another manner. So we will come back to you with more to go with that. And the funds that we will get from HUD, there's a little bit of confusion, I guess I'd say. There are HUD home investment partnership dollars called the American Rescue Plan. So it's home ARP dollars. I think that may be a little different from you're calling ARPA dollars, but I'm not sure. And we will not receive guidance from HUD on that until probably late summer or early fall. So I don't know how we'll be able to use those funds at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's my understanding those funds are something just over $1 million as well. So stay tuned and stay involved. Thank you very much. Then Amber, Blake, again, great job, and thank you for all your help.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Getting virtual claps all over. Thank you very much. Okay, Council, our next item up is General Council discussion before we go to public comment on non-agenda items. Are there any items of General Council discussion this evening? Not. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to draw everyone's attention and to make sure everyone knows that the Geico commercial that's out there, you know, with the guy that has they're in the ballpark and the one guy is setting out the chalk and he's daydreaming about riding his motorcycle on Beartooth Highway. I just wanted to share with everyone that was filmed right here in Billings at Dealer Park. A lot of people don't realize that, and they don't realize that the motorcycle drive is around Beartooth Highway, or that when he's, you know, putting the chalk all over the ballpark, that's Dealer Park. It was filmed right here in Billings. So great commercial out there. So promote something really good for Billings, that national recognition. So.
Absolutely. I had at least one out-of-town friend ask me, isn't that in Billings? Councilmember Yakovich.
Thank you, Honored Council. Because this is a time for discussion, I wanted to talk about code enforcement. And Councilperson Neese brought up some great points. I didn't agree with them all, but he brought up good points that I thought should give him a chance to elaborate on, as well as I would like to just touch on as well for discussion if I can.
Councilmember Neese, you have the floor whether you wanted it or not, I think. Was this on the issue of how quote proactive to be on code enforcement, Councilmember Yakovich? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, Sean, and I'll make a statement first.
Okay, it's all yours.
He spoke a lot already today. So I'm not. It's not a debate so much as just an opportunity to discuss on code enforcement, which I feel, to me, in my ward, equals the value of police. And police are great too, and fire, but code enforcement also is equal to me in that level. So there's ideas of aggressive driven code enforcement versus complaint driven code enforcement. And I would like to just side with being proactive or intentionally driven code enforcement. So part of this is that each ward will have a different component to code enforcement. Whether there are homeowners association in some wards where they are more proactive in their own community, and maybe code enforcement is not a higher priority. They're more what we call self-regulated. But in lower income areas, I think that we can face difficult issues that maybe other areas don't face. So again, I would side with an intentional driven code enforcement rather than just complaint driven. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but just one other thing is I think there's a fear factor it may be perhaps in some areas more than others where neighbors hesitate to report on neighbors. And so this is a factor where a car or maybe a drug house or maybe abandoned home, where code enforcement, police, or others may interact with on issues. So I therefore think it's more important to have intentionally driven code enforcement more than just complaint driven, because again, neighbors are reluctant to complain on other neighbors. So rather than having the neighbor do it, have code enforcement giving them more power or authority. So that's just a little bit of the discussion. And I wanted to give others as well as you, Councilman Neese, what you thought about it. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, and I'll turn it to Councilmember Neese if you'd like to comment further.
Yeah, Councilman Yackwood, thank you for bringing this up. I think code enforcement, whether council wants to have a policy to go proactive or not, I think it's an important discussion. I'm all for code enforcement. I really believe that code enforcement, I think that it helps our city look better. You know, the old saying of shine sells, that's part of the code enforcement, going after things that don't look good around the city to get rid of that. So I do support code enforcement. I think we need to increase the code enforcement officers. My different philosophy is probably in the sense that I believe in our community. Code enforcement is anonymous. You can go on the website, report it. You don't have to put your name, and it'll go to the code enforcement department. The issue is they don't have the people, and I would like to give the community the chance to be able to do it without having the fear of where I've seen other communities, code enforcement drivers around are now the lawn police, or the sprinkler police, because you're not doing it. I don't saying that's what's going to happen with our code enforcement. What I'm saying is I think that I would like to see our community be more involved. I don't want to take that involvement away from the community. I think if we give them the resources where they can easily report, much easier than they can today. I think I mentioned application. If we put some of our funds into designing an application to make it very easy to report that graffiti, if you're driving around, you see it, you can tag it on your phone, and it goes right to code enforcement, and then code enforcement can take it. So those are the type of things. I don't want to see our department growing to where it's our department's doing the code enforcement, finding, reporting. I'd like to see our community come together and then turn that over to code enforcement to help it. So if they're afraid to report to their neighbor, again, making that anonymous reporting, that I think that would bring the code enforcement officer still out there. But we do need to staff it to where if we make it easy enough and we see the volume go up, then make sure we staff that department.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Joy and Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and thank you, Councilmember Yakovich and Neese for contributing to this conversation about. I think, that the whole. I appreciate Councilmember Yakovich's use of the word intentional code enforcement. I like that. Maybe proactive is something that brings up an image or a thought that isn't particularly positive, but I have to agree with Councilmember Yakovich. Intimidation is real. I just got a call from a constituent. She previously made a complaint, and the neighbor came over to her yard and said, "I know you called the city on me." Is she going to call again? She has another issue. There are more problems. Is she going to call again? She did not want me to move that forward because she is afraid of her neighbor. Who do you think they're going to come and accuse her of doing? They're going to come back to her home, to her yard, and say, "You called again." because here's code enforcement and you did it. And I tried to sort of talk about that a little bit, and I said, but it's anonymous, so they can't know who you are. Your information will not be disclosed. And she said, but they will be looking for me and anticipate that I've done it. So you get into that situation, and yeah, it's anonymous, but guess what? Those neighbors are going to come at you because they thought you did it the first time. If it happens twice, they'll come right back. So there is an element of intimidation, and this has been more than one time, many times actually, that I've had this situation with constituents. So although I understand it is anonymous, there will be people who will show up at your house saying, you did it and we know you did it, even though it is anonymous. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. In dealing with the zoning commission for the last 10 years, I visited with Wyatt and with Nicole and the code enforcement folks for extensively. And my definition of proactive means different maybe from someone else. Code enforcement gets a call on an abandoned vehicle, and they go out to the property and find an abandoned vehicle, and across the street there's a car with all the tires off and the hood up and the engine gone. To me, that's being proactive, is seeing don't trip over it and then leave because I'm on another call. Try to deal with the problem that they see there. I don't see proactive as driving around the middle of the city pointing out things. I'm just saying use their common sense when they're on a call rather than have to come back to the same area. That's, to me, is what proactive should mean. And maybe it's a different definition by other people, but that's what I think that they want, is that ability to do that.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Tricky and Shaw?
Representing Ward 3 and the Central Cherry neighborhood and the Southwest Corridor, these are areas that are aging out, and the people who live in them are aging out, and there's a higher and higher number of people who are renters, and a lot of the people who are renting to them are not in the city. So these are areas where we're seeing properties that are not being maintained. So this is a bigger issue for people in Ward 1 and Ward 3. Having said that, I think it's important to understand that code enforcement is law enforcement. And do we expect, if somebody runs a red light, that we can only send a police officer after them if somebody calls in and reports that somebody ran on a red light? No, we don't. If there are problems and we see problems, then we need to actually be able to deal with them. A big part of the problem is just understaffing. But as Councilmember Joy was pointing out, when you're in a situation where somebody knows that the only way that the city is going to come down on them is because a neighbor complained, then anonymous doesn't work. You have to have the city's ability to respond to it without somebody making a complaint in order for anonymous to work. And one last thing is, I don't think that what Councilmember Yakovich and Councilmember Neese are talking about are mutually exclusive. The police department actually needs to have a better process for getting complaints and input from citizens. So that's something that we need to work on across the board in both of those areas. And at the same time, we need to be proactive. We need to go after problems when we see them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw?
So, Mr. Mayor, I'm actually going to bring up something that I heard you say at a meeting, which is the term common sense code enforcement, which I really like, and I think that might solve some of the problems we're talking about. Is that I think in the end, we're mostly all geared toward the same thing, but I think the terms that we're using are partially causing problems. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I think that that's a good term that might help us out.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I tend to agree with what you said because you were agreeing with me. So it's good I haven't changed my mind on that one. So I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think these are all legitimate concerns. Something we'll just have to sort of feel our way through, I imagine, with experience. Also something that we may want to ask our code enforcement officers and that supervisor to develop some broad guidelines on that we could look at, talk about, that sort of thing. So appreciate the discussion. We'll move on unless Wyeth Friday, who opened up his screen, or Kevin Iflin, former captain of the police department, want to comment on this issue.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just real quick, I think, what can be accomplished is two things. Number one, the training that the code enforcement officers receive will be very crucial in that and how to carry out what we might do. And also, you got to leave that officer discretion piece in there for them to deal with situations. They're the ones out there seeing what's happening, and give them some discretion in those certain circumstances to deal with the problem as they feel is the right thing to do. Also, those two things I think would be crucial. And then, Mr. Friday, I don't know if you had something to add to that since you turned on your video.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council, and thank you, Mr. Iflin. And totally, I completely agree with what Mr. Iflin just said. The only thing I was going to add, and as if the public safety levy effort goes forward and goes through second reading and we get into the education phase, we'll talk about this more. But wanted to just mention, I think this conversation you just had was excellent in terms of kind of the idea of what we're talking about with intentional or proactive. One of the things that I wanted to note is part of what we're talking about also is when we see problems or trends around the city, like specific issue areas, that's part of what we're talking about in that proactive sense. If we're seeing more of a certain type of complaint across the city, or we're seeing more of an area where there's a problem that's cropping up again and again, our idea with that is to figure out ways to address it within those areas. So not just the driving around sort of on patrol, but more also saying, hey, we're seeing, in the last several months, an increase in this type of complaint, whether it's in every ward or 4 of the wards or 3 of the wards. And so we'll be able to have some resources to be able to try and focus on that. So that's part of our thought process, at least on the staff side. So I just wanted to add that. And like I said, we'll be bringing more discussion to this as that moves forward. So thanks.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. Councilman Ronning, last word.
Thank you. I just really appreciate this discussion as well. And just to comment on the difference in the way that proactive is looked at and versus how it is right now, complaint driven. Just for me personally, I believe that proactive is more about individual responsibility. Complaint driven to me relies upon one neighbor turning another neighbor in. And that for me is problematic. For proactive, to me, it just feels more like it's the individual property owner taking responsibility for their property. So just wanted to share that and really appreciate the proactive approach. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on then to our final item tonight, which is a public comment on non-agenda items. So if anybody would like to comment on something that wasn't on our agenda tonight, please come to the podium. We'll start here in the library and then again go to anybody online. Please tell us your name and address and ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
Thank you, Your Honor, and council members, and esteemed assistant counsel right there, administrator. Thank you for listening. I've been on many boards and commissions, and I like your comment you made, Penny, about the person has to be involved. They have to be educated on what boards and what they do and don't do. But I came to the podium for a different thing tonight. I came from 24th and Central down. I want to talk about from 24th and Central traffic down to 8th Street. I would like to get the council, I brought this up before, if they could increase the speed limit on 8th Street turning left towards the rims to 35 miles an hour. Because what happens in the morning at work, you're going to work, that traffic does back up quite a bit on the park there. Also, once you get through traffic and to the left, going 35, that's going to result in traffic moving a little bit faster, and you're going to be a little bit better on that. And it's not going to be a charge for the city, because all the city has to do is put out a traffic analysis and do their count. And there is a lot of traffic going that way, and also it will speed up the traffic going from 8th and Central through town and out to the Heights. That's all I have to say, Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Questions?
Any questions? Don't see any. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great. Any other public comment on any item not on our agenda tonight? Please help yourself.
Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South. Mayor and Council, I've talked to you many times about the incident at the Road Dog Toy Run on December 6, 2020. And my concerns about the fact that I was assaulted by a Galloping Goose gang member. He has never been interviewed about that. He has never been part of any reports about that incident. And that's very troubling to me. As I've said before, it reflects the question about the police department and the integrity of it. But even more troubling are some facts, some things that I have found out in the last 6 months since that. First, the Galloping Goose gang is well embedded in our community and to a large extent accepted. One Galloping Goose member ran for city council not too many years ago. Another, the man who assaulted me, apparently has a responsible position at a healthcare contractor used by the state of Montana. From Facebook postings, a former Billings policeman appears to have ties now to the Galloping Goose gang, and an extended family member of a person in a higher position at the Billings Police Department appears to be connected to the Galloping Goose gang as well. The Road Dog Toy Run and memorial runs organized by the Galloping Goose and Ghost Riders motorcycle gangs have been given permission to essentially take over the roads in our town with several hundred vehicles at times without having to go through the normal permitting process that every other large event in this town has to go through. Though all the other events held in this town have extensive documentation, there is no documentation including written permits or agreements for the Road Dog Toy Run and the motorcycle gang events. 3, when I submitted a human relations complaint to the Billings Human Relations Commission about the handling of this incident by the Billings Police Department, the Human Relations Commission let the Chief of Police determine what should be done in response to my complaint. The Human Relations Commission never identified in its public agenda that my complaint would be the subject of a discussion on March 4th, so I was not alerted to attend. And when I made a public records request for the information about that meeting and discussions by the commission, there was no records. Finally, in Facebook posts I've sent to you all, the Human Relations Commission and Chief of Police, the wife of my assailant posted her knowledge that I had filed a human relations complaint. She called it ethical charges against the policeman, though it was not public information at that point and it never appeared as a discussion item in a public meeting. I've repeatedly asked you and the Chief of Police to explain that. I've asked you before that the police department appears and said to you that it appears to be compromised when it comes to the Galloping Goose gang and perhaps others. And I'm asking you again, in your role as oversight, to investigate that possibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else from anyone here in the library? Any other public comment on items not on the agenda from here in the library? If not, we'll look to anybody online. Reminder, just go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, hit the raise hand feature so that our city clerk knows to take you off mute. Denise, do we have anybody online who has raised their hand?
No, Mayor, I have no attendees.
Okay, thank you very much. That then concludes our public comment on non-agenda items. And at 7:26, we are adjourned.